After all she had endured, the shame of begging for leftovers, the cold nights on cracked concrete, and the silent pain of watching her daughters eat while she sat empty, Emma now stood in a warm room with painted walls, real curtains, and a soft bed that smelled of lavender and peace. But peace, as she would soon learn, can be hard to trust when suffering has been your only friend. She lay beside her sleeping daughters, one tucked under her arm and the other curled at her feet, and stared at the ceiling fan above, not because she needed air but because she couldn't sleep. Not yet. Not until she was sure this wasn't another cruel dream sent to wake her up into the same old nightmare. She whispered a prayer, then whispered it again, and though her eyes finally closed, her heart remained half open, afraid to rest too deeply in case the morning came and took it all away, because when you've lived in survival mode, joy isn't comforting, it's suspicious. Back in his mansion, where silence sounded louder than traffic, Mr. Williams sat at his dining table surrounded by luxury that now felt lifeless. Paintings on the wall, marble floors, imported wine, all meaningless when he remembered the look in Emma's eyes that night, when she stood in the dark with nothing but a nylon bag and a tired smile. Helping her had opened something in him, but it also opened questions. How many more Emmas worked under his roof? How many more mothers went home to empty pots while his customers left half-eaten steaks? He looked down at the food in front of him, untouched, and for the first time in years he felt disgusted by his own abundance. That night he didn't eat, not because he was fasting, but because guilt had become his new appetite. At the restaurant, whispers had started curling through the kitchen like steam from a hot pot. Some staff smiled and congratulated Emma on her new role, but others watched her with tightened lips and narrowed eyes. So, just like that, cleaner. Turns PA, one waiter said under his breath. Maybe I should start begging too. And though Emma pretended not to hear, the words stuck like thorns under her skin. The lunchroom, once noisy with gossip, now fell silent when she walked in. Even the janitor who used to joke with her now only nodded stiffly, and slowly, she began to realize that not everyone celebrated her rise. Not because she had wronged them, but because her existence reminded them of their own stagnation. Her first day as Mr. Williams' personal assistant was a storm wrapped in a smile. She sat behind a sleek desk, dressed in a borrowed blouse and skirt too tight at the waist, trying to navigate an unfamiliar laptop with fingers more used to mops than keyboards. Phone calls rang with terms she didn't understand. Meetings flew by with voices too fast and English too clean, and by noon, her palms were sweating so badly, she wiped them on her skirt every 5 minutes. She wanted to run, to hide, to return to scrubbing floors where expectations were low and failure was normal. But every time she thought of quitting, she remembered her daughters' faces on their new pillows, and she whispered to herself, even if I fail, I must fail forward. In their crisp new uniforms, Emma's girls stepped into a school with high walls and even higher expectations. But while the buildings were cleaner, the welcome was colder. In class, other kids whispered, "Who are they?" And one boy laughed, "Those are charity kids," a label sharper than a slap. At break time, the girls sat alone, their lunchboxes untouched, their eyes scanning for their mother even though they knew she wasn't there. At home, Emma noticed their sudden quiet, the way they held each other's hands tightly before school, and her heart sank, because even paradise feels like prison when no one welcomes you inside. One night, as she folded clothes in their new home, Emma came across a weathered photograph tucked deep in a Bible she hadn't opened in years. It was her husband, smiling, holding their eldest as a baby. Memories came flooding back. How he had left with promises of business success, how the calls stopped, how money never came, and how the shame of abandonment replaced the silence he left behind. She had never told her girls the full truth, only that their father was somewhere far. But tonight, as she held that photo, she realized it was time to let go of waiting for someone who had already moved on without looking back. Though, Mr. Williams' name opened doors and his money solved problems. Inside, he was a locked room with no key. Nights became quieter, food lost flavor, and even victory in business felt hollow. He had saved Emma, yes, but her gratitude only reminded him how unloved he felt in his own world. He had no children, no partner, no one who texted him just to ask, "Have you eaten?" And each morning he stared at the expensive art on his walls and wondered if happiness could ever be purchased, or if, like Emma, it could only be earned through loss. One afternoon, as she passed the back hallway, Emma heard quiet sobs. Behind the pantry door sat a young cleaner named Aisha, holding a torn nylon bag with nothing inside. Without a word, Emma walked away, returned with a lunchbox from her own bag, and placed it gently beside the girl. "Eat," she said simply, then walked away without waiting for thanks. That night she skipped dinner, but her heart was full because now she understood something Mr. William was just beginning to learn. When you've known hunger, feeding others becomes a sacred duty. It happened on a Tuesday. Emma was instructed to confirm a supplier for an urgent delivery, but she mixed up the names and called the wrong vendor. The result? Delays, complaints, and a furious client threatening to pull out of a major deal. Mr. William didn't yell, but his disappointment hung in the air like smoke. "I trusted you," he said quietly, and those 3 words broke her more than any insult could. She stood frozen, eyes wet, whispering, "I'm sorry, sir." But as he walked past her, she whispered to herself something even heavier. Maybe they were right. Maybe I don't belong here. Just when life seemed to be balancing, her phone rang with a number she hadn't seen in years. His voice, familiar and poisonous, filled her ears. "Emma, I heard you're doing well now. Let's talk about the girls. They deserve a father, don't they?" Her heart thudded. The man who disappeared when she needed him most was now asking for entry. Not out of love, but entitlement. She didn't answer, couldn't speak. And just like that, the peace she had fought so hard to build cracked again. Emma confided in Mr. William, voice trembling, and he responded not with pity, but quiet resolve. 2 days later, he handed her a file. Inside were photos, records, a list of locations. Her husband had remarried, fathered another child, and opened a business under someone else's name. "He's not here for family," Mr. William said coldly. "He's here for opportunity." And Emma, for the first time, felt not just pain but righteous anger. She clutched the file like armor and whispered, "He will not break what I've rebuilt." He showed up uninvited one morning, holding sweets and fake smiles. The younger girl hid behind Emma. The older stood still, staring at him. "Why did you leave us?" she asked, voice trembling but clear. He fumbled, eyes darting, but they didn't move toward him, didn't cry or call him daddy. Because absence, when repeated enough, becomes its own presence, and they had learned to love without him. He left quietly, defeated not by noise but by their silence. Mr. William offered her another step up, a supervisory role managing staff, benefits, bigger pay, but taking it meant overseeing people she once cleaned floors beside, including those who now viewed her as a traitor. She sat alone that night staring at the letter, heart torn between loyalty and legacy. Then she remembered her daughter's soft beds, the gas stove, the laughter she'd fought so hard to protect, and she said out loud, "They don't have to like me, but my children must never lack again." One morning at brunch, his brother leaned over the table and said, "So you gave a cleaner a house and a job? Are you sleeping with her?" Mr. Williams stood up slowly, placed his napkin down, and replied, "I gave a woman dignity. If that offends you, then maybe you've been rich too long." He left the restaurant that day not with shame but clarity. Not everyone will understand kindness, especially those who've never needed it. She returned quietly, not for nostalgia but for closure. The building was still broken but now occupied by a widow with 2 sons. Emma placed a sealed food pack at the doorstep and walked away without knocking, because sometimes the best way to repay suffering is to make sure it doesn't visit someone else. New school, new friends, better shoes, and books with their names on the cover. Emma's daughters bloomed slowly but surely. One drew pictures of their new house and taped it to the fridge. The other started writing poems in a pink notebook. One day, the younger whispered during bedtime, "Mommy, I like it here." And Emma tucked the blanket tighter, her smile small but fierce. because now she wasn't just feeding them food. She was feeding them a future. Inspired by Emma, he launched an initiative for struggling working mothers across his company. Monthly groceries, free uniforms for their children, and emergency housing support. He called it the Daughter's Table, and when asked why, he simply said because every child deserves to eat from a plate that doesn't carry pain. She enrolled in night classes, typing, email writing, basic accounting, and though her classmates were half her age, she sat in the front row, pencil sharp and heart sharper. "I'm not just working anymore," she said one evening to Mr. William. "I'm learning how to win." And with every new word she mastered, she took one more step away from the girl who once begged for leftovers. It came in a brown envelope, official seal, heavy paper, gold print. "You've been nominated for a national award in quiet courage and motherhood." The letter didn't mention who submitted her name, but she knew. Because some things don't need to be said out loud to be true. As the camera pans over Emma preparing a meal in her now joyful kitchen, her phone buzzes, a message from a women's empowerment group in the UK. "We saw your story. Would you be willing to speak at our next conference? Flights and stay covered." She reads it twice, breath held. Her daughters enter and ask, "Mommy, who is it?" She doesn't answer right away. She just smiles, places a hand over her chest, and whispers, "I think I'm about to change again." Cut to black, to be continued.